Hello, my name is Austin Belzer, and welcome to the first interview from South by Southwest 2020. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to showrunner, producer, and screenwriter Joe Tierney and director Kat Whalen. If you're not in the know about what Fuck Up Synonymous is about, it's a coming-of-age TV pilot that follows rebellious teen Joe on his tumultuous first day at controversial therapeutic board school. You can watch the pilot at South by Southwest and the independent TV pilot program at the Long Center on March 9th and the Alamo Lamar on March 13th. I'll have tickets to buy your South by Southwest pass in the link in the description of the interview. But Joe, Kat, apologies for the really long intro, but
Oh,
welcome.
yeah, thank you
Hit,
so much, Austin.
yeah, thank you. You
Yeah,
hit
no
all the good
problem.
notes, so very happy with that intro. Thank you.
Yeah. So first up, Joe, I'd love to hear about the inspiration for the idea for Fuck Ups Anonymous.
Sure. Yeah, so everything you saw was true. That's very similar to how my first day at the therapeutic boarding school went. I have been trying to tell this story for about 12 years, I'd say, or finding a way to tell this story. When I left at 18, I think my first thought walking out was that would make a pretty good movie. And then, I worked and navigated the production industry of film and television for the next 12 years. And I tried to write this many times. And I think COVID was the first time I wrote a script, and I tried to make it an entirely a comedy to kind of mask the trauma and not really come to terms with it. And it just wasn't working. And unfortunately, the true story is that over 110 alumni of this school have died. So the whole time I'm getting updates of all these, you know, men and women who were dying from overdose or suicide. And it started not making me mad and angry. It just said like I want to forget about this kind of. And I just ignored it. And it wasn't until the film strike where I had more time that unfortunately my best friend passed from there, and that re-sparked the inspiration and said, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna do this the right way, kind of, and not just make it my story, but make it their story as well. So I'd say the inspiration was always there, but I was afraid to sort of tackle it till enough was enough, kind of, and yeah.
My condolence. I
Thank
didn't
you.
know that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a horrifying true story but it needs to be told. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, places like this, and the school is now shut down, so I think yeah.
Yeah. And then um quick question for Kat. I would love to hear what drew you to Fuck Ups Anonymous.
Yeah, so I have been working with Joe for what, 4 years before this. We were on a long-term TV project together and got to know each other pretty well. Had some fun adventures on set and around set, and always knew Joe as just this incredible positive on set character who just jumped in and got what needed to be done, which is always great when with a colleague on set. And then after we wrapped the final episode of that show, and we hadn't seen each other in probably about 8 months. The writer strike was going, and we ran back into each other. And Joe called me a couple days later and said, "Hey, I've got this project that I'd love you to read. Just see what you think about." And having no idea that this was part of Joe's story, part of his history, I was completely shocked to read it. And we jumped on the phone after I'd read it right away and had a really heartbreaking but really inspiring conversation just about where he had gotten to with the script and telling the story, and how incredibly genuine and vulnerable and honest the story was, but also how invested Joe was in telling not only his own story, but the story of other people that had been in this school, had lived this experience, and then also looking at the staff that could easily be painted as these two-dimensional villains, but looking really at kind of where best intentions go awry and how things spiral out of control. And I think we bonded over sort of the not only the incredibly disturbing tone of the show, but also those little moments of dark humor that always bubble up in situations like this to make something like that palatable, make it survivable. And it was just, I was so inspired by how Joe was coming to terms and determined to tell the story that I felt compelled, I had to jump in and help it. So I was so excited when he asked me if I would direct.
Yeah, and I know we talked a little bit about, I know you've both kind of mentioned this, but kind of a reworking of the script during the writer's strike. I would love to hear a bit about that because, yeah, I just find that interesting.
Yeah, I think it that allowed me the time to revisit it and see how I wanted to tell this. From I think I had learned so much about myself, how I was, and how much that school had affected me years later, that it was like I was able to say, like, this story's still unfolding for me personally, in addition to it's still not ending. And, the New York Times published a whole article on this school, and Paris Hilton has brought awareness to schools like this. So there was the writer's strike was a time to revisit and say, what do you try? Like, what is the message? What is this story about? And that's when I realized it's about the loss of identity. And it's not just about the loss of identity for me, because I was able to reach out to other students and say, essentially, how are you doing? And they're like, every day is kind of, like, and they could be, to society's eyes, I was doing great. I just worked on some great shows. You know what I mean? I had made my career choice to work in production. I was doing pretty good, and it just still wasn't enough. And that's when I realized, like, the story, yeah, I was hiding from it. So I think the strike allowed me to have the time to revisit it and see what I wanted to say. And then that's when we made the decision to shoot the proof of concept while I was writing the whole bigger thing. Yeah. So I say because of that, because, COVID back in 2020, I think I didn't want to come to terms with what it was, how traumatic this whole place was. So I tried to mask it with comedic elements that just weren't hitting. And I also just tried to make it focus solely around my story, which I realized when I revisited that what tells this story is all the students, and not just me. And yeah, it's about loss of identity more than anything else.
Yeah, that's a really interesting answer. And, you know, you talked earlier about how you've collaborated on previous projects together, and I'd love to hear about just having that natural language and between longtime collaborators like yourselves, um, kind of shortcutted a lot of those things that I think a lot of first-time writers and directors deal with.
Yeah, I think one amazing thing about, the fact that we were shooting this after the writer's strike, but a lot of us hadn't really worked for so long and had seen each other around in support of the strike as it was going on. But suddenly, this came together so quickly, really from the time I first talked to Joe and knowing that he and his producing team had been working and finding locations and getting everything set up before I jumped in December, mid-December. But then we shot it in mid-January. And so having that shorthand between us and all of these other crew members that were coming together really out of love to support Joe in telling this story. It was amazing to see the experience that we had had on a much larger project translating into a much more kind of scrappy, contained 2.5, 3 day shoot because it was so smooth and we were all speaking the same language and we all knew exactly kind of what our order of attack was going to be. And really, as we were folding the cast in, getting so lucky with all of our cast members who also brought the same amount of heart and enthusiasm and dedication. It was really inspiring to me as the director to kind of be leading the charge. But then it was also so wonderful to have this history with Joe where we really trusted each other. And I was so thankful that he trusted me, but we could have honest conversations. We knew kind of where we needed to meet to have discussions about how to shape the storytelling. And on set, even we could be having those conversations in looks and shorthand that would just keep everything moving. And then to see Andrew Trust, who our fantastic DP that I hadn't worked with before, but who knew Joe and our amazing producer Nicole Payson from when they had worked together. I mean, he also just had such a smart approach to getting so much shot in such a tight window that it was really an incredible production machine moving forward through the whole shoot.
Yeah, thank you for that insightful answer. And I guess lastly, one of the tags on this is Gen Z, and I'd love to hear about um, how that kind of changed the project, if any, and then kind of what your audience, what you expect audiences to take away from the screening of the pilot.
And, you know, I think we weren't expecting that tag, but this is a story that we hope you can see yourself in, whether you went to public school, private school, a therapeutic boarding school, whether you were in high school in the 60s or in 2025. So, and why it's so important to talk about all these students, because we all have similarities and we all have the awkwardness of growing up and we all have the struggle. I mean, growing up is hard. 16 is such a tender age where you're finding yourself. So imagine to get your identity stripped. So, you know, I was pretty thrown off by the Gen Z tag, but the purpose I want more than anything is I want Gen Z to relate to this as much as millennials and as much as the boomers too, if they would. I know. So, yeah, what I want them to walk away with is two things. I want them to know what happens next, but I really do want them to see themselves in some of these. When we tell the bigger thing, I want them to see themselves in some of these characters, and I want it to be relatable, and I wanted to just show how hard growing up is, because I don't care who you are. It's we all label ourselves or get labeled, and whether it's something huge like I had or something small that you carry into your adulthood. Yeah. So, and just when they're watching the proof, what I want them to just kind of what we talked about is I want them to, you know, feel how horrifying this is, and I want them to feel sick to their stomachs. But I also think we're able to kind of include little moments where they can laugh or just say, like, oh, this is so messed up, and catch themselves smiling. And I don't know, you know? Yeah. I think so. Yeah. I hope I answered that right.
Yeah, you did, and I hope boomers like it too. But th- uh, thank you both for taking time out of your day to discuss the pilot, Fuck Ups Anonymous. Once again, Fuck Ups Anonymous is screening at South by Southwest in the Independent TV pilot program at the Long Center on March 9th at 6 p.m. and at the Alamo Lamar on March 13th at 6:15 p.m. You can find a link to purchase tickets for either screening in the description of the interview. But until next time.
Thank you so much, Austin.
Thanks.
You can find me on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads under my username, Austin B Media, as well as my Discord and Patreon community chat. Speaking of Patreon, if you'd like early access to this next interview or more exclusive content, head on over to patreon.com/AustinBmedia. For just $3 a month, you get 48-hour early access to my reviews, podcasts, interviews like this one, and articles, plus patron-only channels on my Discord. The $10 a month tier, you'll unlock uncut podcast episodes, exclusive episodes, and more. Until next time.